Hi, I'm Tom Woodward, and I teach at Trinity College of Florida, and I'm your host for the Princeton Chronicles, which contain the highlights of a delightful conversation I had recently in Princeton, New Jersey, with 3 professors at the university. These professors are well known in their fields of British history, of chemical engineering, plasma physics, but they have something that bonds them together, that pulls them together, and that is their articulate faith in Jesus Christ. You know, the seal of Princeton University is like a shield, and it contains an open Bible and the words Dei sub numine viget, which is a Latin motto which means under God's power may she flourish. Well, there's something interesting that's flourishing at Princeton University, and that is a Christian faith, a vital, articulate Christian faith among several of the faculty there that you're going to have an opportunity to meet today. Let's travel to Princeton and meet these 3 professors. We're delighted that you 3 gentlemen could join us today. And I'd like to begin with Dr. Eugenio Biagini. Dr. Biagini has been a professor for several years at the Princeton campus, did his graduate work at the University of Pisa in Italy. And Dr. Biagini's specialty is British history. He studied for 7 years and did graduate work at Cambridge University, and is the author of 2 textbooks published by Cambridge University Press. Dr. Biagini, thank you for joining us. Next, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Robert Prud'homme. Dr. Prud'homme is a professor of chemical engineering at Princeton University, and he is a graduate of both Stanford University and the University of Wisconsin, where he received his PhD in chemical engineering and has been on the Princeton faculty since 1978, editor, I believe, of several books in that area. Dr. Prud'homme, thank you for joining us. And finally, Dr. Bob Kaita. Dr. Kaita received his graduate degree and his PhD from Rutgers University and is the principal research physicist at the Plasma Research Fusion Research Laboratory on the Princeton campus. He received his PhD in the area of nuclear physics and is a graduate, as we said, of Rutgers, where he has published a number of papers in the area of fusion research. Dr. Kaita, thank you for joining us. As we gather here today, and I wanted to thank you again for taking your time out of your busy schedule. We had 2 professors that we spoke with yesterday. They were jetting out of the Princeton area to California, and so I'm glad that we were able to gather the 3 of you together. Let me pose a general question to you as Christian professors here on the Princeton campus. What do you find to be some of the points of contact between yourself and those interested in the Christian faith? In particular, let me pose a situation. Let's say a student came to you, had heard about your faith perspective, your Christian commitment, and they came to you and said, for example, Dr. Prud'homme or Dr. Biagini, what do you see to be some of the reasons that the Christian faith is true? In other words, this person is an interested but skeptical inquirer, and he says to you, for example, Dr. Kaita, why is Christianity true? What would you say? I don't know who wants to volunteer to take that question.
So I could start by saying that this has happened with the graduate students I've worked with from time to time, and I try to put it in a little bit of the context of what we do in our work. We start out with some data, and one way of approaching it is to say that we have the data of humanity. We find that people have values, they have standards to which they would like to live up to, but they don't. If you combine that with a belief in a God, a creator, and a need to reconcile yourself with that creator, then the only way I feel is through the person of Jesus Christ. This is the only faith I know of that provides this venue. And expressed in those terms, many people do find that understandable if they accept the historicity of Christ and the existence of God.
So the moral reality of the sense of right and wrong is the entree, if you will, the contact point between the claim that Christianity is true and the reality that we experience.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Well, is there anything that would come to either of you other gentlemen, Dr. Biagini, Dr. Prud'homme, in regard to this scenario where a student says, why do you believe Christianity is true? Anything that you would add to that?
Well, for myself, in addition to the moral argument, which I think is a very strong one, that there really is a right and wrong embedded in the universe, I'd point to the fact that there is this creation that we are faced with. One of the experiences that happened to me in college as an undergraduate was in my sophomore year physics course. The professor is Professor Sands, who was the associate director of the Stanford Linear Accelerator, came into the physics class one day and said, we now know the universe began, X billion years ago, and there was this thing called the Big Bang that happened back then. That was, as a fairly young Christian at that time, that was a revelation for me, because all through high school I had been sort of taught that the physical universe had always been, that was the standard picture back then. And here was a world-class scientist telling me that no, there was a time equals zero when the universe that we know came into being. And that certainly is a very strong point, I think, for the Christian position, that there is a point in time, the research from the Big Bang, much of which is done here at Princeton, indicating that there was a start to this whole physical world we see. The third thing for me has to do with what I believe is the reality of the person and resurrection of Christ. Again, in my senior year in college, I went through a time of real crisis in my faith, trying to decide, do I believe this thing, Christianity, is true? And so there's a several-month period where I wrestled with that. And this was while I was, very involved in Christian activities and going to church. At the end of that period, I realized that my belief in Christianity had to do with the fact that I really believed the resurrection was true, that the best explanation for what happened at that time, what's recorded in the Gospels, the motivation of the early church and the people who claimed to have witnessed this, was in fact this was true. And if that was true, then of course Christianity is true.
So we have points from the moral area, the reality of right and wrong. We have a point in the area of science saying that the evidence seems to indicate there was a point in time when the universe began and then the resurrection. Dr. Biagini, it looks like a lot has been covered. Would you like to add anything?
Yes, well, from my point of view, there are two sides to the answer I would give. There's a personal side, which will start probably from Dr. Kaita's point, which I feel very personally because it was an integral part of the way in which I became a Christian. But also from a professional point of view, as a historian, I would call this person's attention on the amazing historical professionality of much of the biblical writing. I mean, not all the Bible is history books, but many of them are, and the way they are written in terms of the critique of facts and the balance between social history, economic factors, personal choice, political history, military history, just amazing. I mean, it's difficult to find it in contemporary history to some extent, and surely what is striking is the extent to which none of the biblical historians had any difficulty in denouncing the flaws in the personality of the heroes of their stories. People such as Moses or Abraham or David come out to the Bible as ordinary sinners in such a way as you wish to find in contemporary history on present day or 19th century characters. But despite the fact that we know in terms of documents, in terms of primary sources, quite a lot more about these 19th century or 20th century characters, I feel that much of present-day historiography falls short of biblical standards from a professional point of view. So that is a strong argument from my experience.
So the actual biblical data indicate no hero development of heroes so much as a presentation of their flaws.
Precisely. What I'm saying is that if the methodology and the reliability of these documents as professional history is apparent, so possibly this is a further argument why the spiritual content of the Bible should be listened to carefully before you make a decision.
Doctors Prud'homme, Kaita, what would you add about what kind of a variety of things did you encounter in this pilgrimage, in this checking out of the possibility of faith in Christ?
I consider myself very fortunate in having Christian parents, being raised in a Christian home, but a home where there was a great premium, an emphasis on education. My parents were very well educated, and I remember very vividly my father encouraging critical reading of the Bible as well as books like The Origin of Species at a fairly young age. And so there was always a sense of lively discussion of these truths embodied in the great works, the Bible and other works that people had produced over the years. And also a sense that what, as Dr. Prud'homme was mentioning, what you know about nature and the book of nature, as it were, is no different in terms of its truth, its veracity, than what you would find in the book of the law, so the scripture, that they are all part of an integrated whole, something coming from the same creator of both. And so I very vividly remember parents taking me to museums and going to collect rocks and things of that sort, and appreciating God's creation from that perspective, but also, along with the comments that Dr. Biagini was mentioning, getting a sense that when the Bible is spoken of, it was just as real. I remember my father dragging out maps of the Middle East and pointing out where these things actually occurred. And so in a sense, that history that was embodied in the scriptures, that knowledge of the universe that God had created, was all a seamless picture of a complete whole, that there was no distinction between that which was scriptural or that which was having to do with God and other worlds and the natural world that the contemporary person would have to use as the only judge of reality. But instead, they were all part of what God had created, and having gone to college in the 60s and the 70s with all the turmoil, there was a tendency of wanting to question everything. And I have to admit, I had my periods of doubts and questions, as Dr. Prud'homme had mentioned. But I think through it all, I would have to say, the grace of God, I think these foundations served me well in keeping my feet in the right direction, as it were, and my face in the right direction.
If the evidence, let's say that the evidence of the world, history, scientific evidence, if it's such a good fit with the claims, the truth claims of Christianity, why is it that we encounter the kind of, at times in the universities, we encounter this kind of hostile caricature of Christianity as something that's irrational? Let me mention the well-known cartoon that Dr. Provine, not Dr. Prud'homme, but Dr. Provine at Cornell University, the eminent biologist, put in a recent essay. And the cartoon showed a Gothic church door, and there by the door was a brain bin in a box with, written on the side was, "Brains, please." So the implication is check your brains before you enter the church door. And of course, Dr. Was it Dawkins, I believe, author of Blind Watchmaker, the professor at Oxford, has said that the creation concept found in the Bible is has no more value than the idea that, I think he said that the idea of a West African tribe that says that the world was made from the excrement of ants. Okay, those two stories are equally mythological. How do you, number one, how do you explain this sort of barrage, in basic terms, this picturing of Christianity as irrational, and then how do you respond to those kinds of of comments.